You know, from a very young age, I loved sport, and I was a participant of sport from the age of probably 7 or 8 in the various disciplines. And I think sport gave me an outlet as a child and a teenager, and then as an adult, to one, have social connections, but also with a very competitive nature, have the opportunity to compete. So I think the opportunity to work in sport then kind of led me down the path based on my own experience. Yeah. I think the one thing that is very prevalent today, or that is changing with the new generation coming through, that we used to have probably 1 or 2 careers, you know, in our lifetime. As you're a Year 12 student today, you are likely to have many careers, but I'd suggest that you learn certain skill sets that are really going to take you to a variety of industries and become an expert in doing that. So if then sports is the field that you want to move into, you have an opportunity to do so. But be an expert in your field so you can actually move through industries rather than being stuck in an industry because you're very narrow focused. It is seeing the kids really growing and thriving and feeling that they are part of something bigger than themselves. Winning games is one thing, but actually seeing communities and teams and families thrive because of kids basically enjoying and being part of a sport. I think that's what makes me, get up in the morning, because that's exciting. In sport, I think generally the sport, except for the exception of the biggest sports like AFL and rugby, that have kind of commercial funding, and football as well, because they have some commercial funding through their commercial teams. You need to wear many hats, and you have to have many skill sets. So being a CEO in a general business requires you to have certain skill sets. In sport, because you are limited on resources, I think your fine-tuned skills in anything to do with basic, HR, contract management, people management, and also understanding organizational structures, understanding how to build strategies, is ultra critical. You're not going to be able to rely on a number of resources to help you do that. You're likely to have to do that yourselves or with some external help. So in the sports industry, I think the fact that you wear many hats and you're not necessarily narrowly focused on a particular area where you're delivering outcomes, I think is a major difference. The other thing is that because of you don't really have the opportunity to have a lot of resources, so people do a lot of times a few things rather than one. And that means a lot of times that you work very long hours. So a 9 to 5 job, you will probably find when you go and work somewhere else, but not in sport. I think sport works any hour of any day of the week in the year, depending on what's needed. So the sport will be basically based on the activities. It's very event based. So you have camp, you have tournaments, and you'll have competitions, and then you'll have and the people need to be available for when you run your activities, which means that you may have run a lot of mornings, a lot of evenings, and a lot of weekends, and a lot of holidays. So when the people generally are on holidays, sports people generally work. And that's a big difference to working in any corporate industry, I think, where you generally have, your normal working week. You may work long hours, which a lot of people do, but I do believe in sports that your flow of hours is so dependent on when you're going to deliver your events and your activities. So that's a huge difference to working in corporate. There are so many things we would like to do, and to actually find revenue and opportunities to generate revenue so we can put more people on the ground to provide opportunities for kids to play. I think, that's the biggest challenge we have. And as the business model needs to evolve, I think one of the things the Sports Commission has looked at is, how do you have a unified model in sports? You don't have a lot of duplication. I think there are different roles for the NSOs. For us, it's Basketball Australia versus the States. You need to have an organisation on the ground that delivers the sport and does that effectively. Do you need CEOs in all these roles? Potentially not in the future, but you really need strong GMs to be actually deliver and deal with the state governments because of the the government structure we have in Australia as well. You can't be relying on dealing with the federal government as you would in my home country, Sweden. You'd be dealing with your federal government that holds a lot of the funding, and then you'll be dealing with the local councils. Primarily, the middle layer of the state governments, like we have in Australia, is non-existent in a lot of countries. And for us to be able to lobby and create opportunities for funding into the sport, you require this kind of structure. And so I think that is our biggest challenge is to actually find more funding. And to be able to then to deliver the sport that the way we think and the sports deserves to be delivered to the community. Because I worked for many years and recruited many people over the years, there are a couple of key things that I look at. I look at resilience and people that have actually been able to have some staying power, have been able to deliver some good outcomes. And show that they have an aptitude to want to learn. Because in sport, as I said earlier, it is not one role. You need to be able to be flexible and adaptable. So what I look for in people are those three main attributes when you're looking at attributes. And then you of course look if people have experience. Is sports experience is it necessary? I would say in basketball here, in our office here in Sydney, and we have very few people that are actually basketball people outside of the basketball roles. So if you work in high performance here, and we deal with all the high performance kids from the pathway, on the pathway starting at the age of 13, 14, obviously they're basketball people. The competitions people that work and manages all our state competition juniors and seniors are not necessarily basketball people. They understand how to manage competitions. So do they understand basketball? Possibly. But do they go to basketball every weekend? My answer would be possibly no. I would say definitely no. So they are very strong on competitions. Our people that work in our community growth area, are people that understand sport. So our development officers and business development officers are actually sports development people, not necessarily focused on basketball only. So one is a basketball background, another one has got a netball background. So I think when you're dealing with the clubs and associations out in the field, to have an understanding on what makes a club or an association work is more important than having the passion for that particular sport. I think you need to be interested in sport, because otherwise I think you don't have those three attributes that I talked about earlier, because you need to be able to feel that you want to be part of something bigger than yourself. And can I just add one thing as well? And this is one thing that I think a lot of people talk about constantly. Sport is not a company. A company has a finite lifetime, and it kind of stops and ends with either an owner or it has shareholders, and that may evolve over time. It may have a long life. A sport will never end. A sport will have, evolve and change over time, and technically we're just custodians of the sport as we're here. And if we try to own it and say that it's this is mine, I don't think we'll ever do it justice. So we need to be here to feel that we can make a difference and change it and evolve it while we're in the roles that we hold, and feel like we left it in a better position than we found it. So we can always add something. Now that is not always easy, but I think that's a very good mindset to have when you work in sport. My biggest lesson is I like to kind of work, to plan and execute and work towards executing a plan to get to an outcome. Sport takes time and it is generally relatively slow. And the part of the reason is because in an organization, you're dealing with customers normally, right? So I say we're dealing with customers, or you're providing a service to somebody. In sport, you're actually working with volunteers in clubs and associations. It's not their main job. They're there because their children participate or because they love the sport. Therefore, they don't have the same priority, or they don't have the same the timelines that you work to are not necessarily going to be their timelines. So you've got to be considerate of that. And I think the business model then deals with them. And the second part is that the members that are participating and playing becomes the second layer. So how do you attract people to come into a sport and say, I want to play basketball and I want to stay playing basketball because I love this sport and it does so many great things and I want to continue being part of that. So you need to, as an organization, you need to influence the people out there to choose your sport and stay in it, while you still work with the clubs and organizations that actually are delivering the sport with you to actually grow and evolve. So the business model is actually quite complex compared to a lot of big organizations that are either selling a product or a service, providing a service simplistically as an organization. But the multi-layered approach in sport means that it's the actual takes longer, and to get buy-in from each of the layers to be able to move through that. And I think that takes time. And if you look at sports like AFL, football and rugby are probably the bigger ones that actually have taken the professional teams, providing that layer of professional teams into and connect that into their grassroots sports. They are successful because they can provide funding from top down, and they also provide that DNA connectedness, so you and I, looking at the sport, feel connected with that team and therefore have a different level of opportunity for the actual sport to market itself. And that is very different to sports that don't have that where everything is kind of separate. So our aim in basketball, for my perspective, would be to create that kind of same DNA, because I think that allows the sports to grow and evolve. I do believe that sports management will be taken more seriously as a degree. And I think that is very, very important, because these sports are a business. And no matter if you work in a smaller sport or a bigger sport, the business skills are critical for you to be able to kind of move through a lot of the things that you need to get done. You need finance skills, you need business skills, and you need to understand certain aspects of the sport to be able to deliver, obviously, the sports aspects of it. But you can actually separate the skills into 2 or 3 separate areas. And it's important to recognize that. And the degrees need to reflect that. We have recruited people that come out of sports management degrees and have very strong skill sets in member development and general sports development. And I think the big aspects of what we really need to add into a sports management degree are the business skills. And they're not easy to harness. You need to learn a lot of those through theory and experience. But I think it's very critical that is actually a very strong, big component of what needs to happen in the future. Can I just say this? I think this is one that is a lesson for me. So I'm going to take this as a lesson. I have had different parts of, in different parts of my career, I've probably extended myself and worked really, really hard and worked very long hours to the point where I've been exhausted. And I think coming into sport, I thought actually that because it was sport, that it was going to be different. Sport never stops. So you have to create that for yourself. You have to create the balance. You have to create the rhythm. I put on a lot of weight and I was exhausted after my first 18 months. I didn't stop for about 18 months. And I then realized the sports cycle just is 365 days a year. So you have to create that yourself. Now you have to say that it's okay to stop and go home, and the competitions will still run, and the actual, the camps and the, programs will still continue running. So the main thing that we've implemented here with the staff is to make sure that people take leave and that people take time after they've worked weekends, worked extensive like mornings or evening shifts, that they actually have time off. So we drive the culture of it's okay, you don't need to be here 24/7. That's shifted a lot of the people here. I have to say, I met a lot of people that work in sport that are completely exhausted. And I think that's not healthy. You're meant to reflect, as the questions you asked me, how do you keep a balanced lifestyle? Is that it's okay. You are meant to reflect sport and therefore also be healthy and be still active and have a balance. And I think you need to reflect that that's okay. And as a leader, I need to lead the way with that. So it's okay with the staff. To know it's okay if I go home at 5:30 because I need to go to the gym at 6. I don't need to stay here because I still, it will still be there tomorrow morning. The main thing I think that has shifted that is that we needed to stipulate change, and we needed to drive that change very, very hard. But it's hard when you're thin on the ground and you only have so many resources and people have a lot of work to do. It's a very busy environment. And you are not having the opportunity to work with people that can provide potential writing, memorandums of understanding, writing contracts. A lot of those things, you rely on your expertise to write a lot of those with some input, clearly. And writing, is a big part of it. There's a lot of very document heavy. Bylaws, constitutions, charters. I actually understand now, which I didn't understand when I started a sport. A lot of people that study law end up in sports management, and I actually understand why. Because a lot of the work that you do are a lot about contract management or contract law, and negotiations, and I think that is, so I understand why that happens. It doesn't mean there can't be other people coming into the field, but I understand why people choose it that have a background in law, because it's a very big component of what you do.